Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I am your host, Jason Cercone, and today we're going to tackle the subject of pros and cons of doing podcast seasons. Rolling out a podcast season is a great way to get a big chunk of content out at one time. Once that content is released, you set up a binge effect for your listeners. Instead of waiting week to week for new shows to hit, they get multiple shows all at once that they can listen to at their leisure. It's the exact same way streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime Video roll out their original content. Obviously, they want you spending as much time as possible on their platform, so bringing you an entire season at once will keep your eyes glued to the screen for hours at a time. Anyone who's binged Cobra Kai like I have knows exactly what I'm talking about. The idea of seasons being delivered to us all at once goes to show how entertainment consumption has changed over the years. I remember growing up, DVR wasn't a thing and setting up your VCR wasn't always the most reliable thing. So if there was a must-watch, can't-miss program on, you had to be in front of the TV so you didn't miss a minute. It was an era of mid-season breaks and season-ending cliffhangers that kept you wondering who shot JR through the entire summer until the show's triumphant return in the fall. My God, did I date myself with that reference. But, for the most part, that's a thing of the past now. Now, that element of surprise, it's still in place, but it's more season to season now instead of episode to episode. I mentioned Cobra Kai a couple seconds ago. As this episode of Pod Theory goes live, all us Karate Kid junkies are on the edge of our seats waiting for the 4th season. Another one of my favorites is Breaking Bad. I watched all but the final 8 episodes of that in binge format to get caught up, then watched how the series concluded like everyone else. I remember being so sucked in by those final episodes that waiting from one Sunday to the next seemed like absolute torture. It made me very happy I didn't have to wait for the satisfaction that the first 4.5 seasons delivered. You know, just like the spoiled TV watcher that I am. So now that I've gone completely off track here, let's shift the focus back to podcasting. Releasing your podcast content in season format has its pros and it has its cons, as the title of this episode would indicate. First, let's take a look at some of the pros. Like I mentioned before, you get that binge effect with a season release. Getting your listeners to consume a large chunk of your brand content all at once can be a great way to build the trust and loyalty that keeps them invested in the entire scope of your brand. Another pro to season format is it allows you to put in all the work necessary to release your podcast content up front, then give yourself a break from production. If you do a season that consists of 10 episodes, for example, once all the work is done to get those episodes produced and released, you can put all of your attention on marketing that content over a period of time versus repeating the production process week over week. With a season format, you can focus in on a certain subject that's pressing in your industry and devote all of your episodes in that block to info, to commentary, and to interviews regarding that subject. Each new season can build upon the last one or turn to another subject entirely. There's definitely some flexibility in play when you use this format. Another pro for seasons is with the release of a large bulk of content, you now have several resources at your disposal that you can repurpose for blogs, for videos, for newsletters, for social media posts. A lot of work will go into producing your new podcast season, so be sure you're maximizing your efforts and using all of your content in every way possible. Okay, so that covers some of the pros of doing your brand podcast in season format. Let's take a look at a couple of the cons. The biggest con is you won't have that fresh daily, weekly, or bi-weekly content hitting your audience on a consistent basis. So you'll need to find a supplement to your podcast to keep your listeners engaged. This can be done by consistently marketing and promoting your episodes once they're live. You can do live videos on a consistent basis, and you can include some of the guests that were featured on your season in some of those videos as well. Another con is the amount of work that needs to be done on the front end to make the season come together. Now, depending on how you work, this can be a pro or a con. Some people like to build up a large bank of episodes all at once, and that would make this a pro. But if you do your episodes week to week, trying to do everything in one big block format could come off as a negative. But producing multiple episodes at a time can be a bit daunting no matter which way you look at it. Be sure your schedule allows you to do this format effectively. A con you really want to stay as far away from as you can is the loss of interest between seasons. After your season goes live, you'll have earned yourself a little bit of a break. But don't let that break extend to the point where your podcast slides down your priority list. You should always be thinking about what you want to focus on for your next season and do some light planning while you recharge and stay away from the production end. When it's time to get back into it, be ready to go hard once again to ensure your production quality doesn't slip from season to season. Now, how long should you go between seasons? That's a pretty open-ended question. I always relate it back to how TV used to roll. The best shows typically were scheduled for their seasons to end in May-ish, and then the new season would return sometime in the fall. So that's a good 3 to 4 month gap between seasons. Now, if you recall, back in the day, some of these networks would do reruns between seasons, so there was something to keep viewers engaged until fresh episodes were ready to debut. Now that everything is available in more of a streaming on-demand format, that's a little bit less of a thing. But in relation to your podcast, you've got to think about how you're going to be keeping people engaged in between your seasons. As it comes to the season format of your podcast, I would consider doing 3 to 4 seasons per year. You can do more, you could do less, but 3 to 4, in my opinion, seems like the sweet spot. The number of episodes in your season is your call, but be sure you do enough to truly engage your audience. I wouldn't do 3 episodes as a season and then call it a day. Really give your listeners something to sink their teeth into. Whether your content is spread out and released week to week or in seasons, value is still the lead metric you should be focused on. Be sure your podcast is packed with value and with engagement, and you'll set yourself up for return listeners when the next season debuts. And don't forget, you're paying for that airtime. So use that time to your advantage to not only grow your podcast, but to keep your audience engaged between the release of your new seasons. And that will wrap up today's lesson here on Pod Theory. Before we go, it's time for another installment of Deck Pandemonium. That's right, our friends at Decks are official sponsors of Pod Theory, and it's great having these decks by my side when I'm recording interviews. Decks will add life to your podcast, they'll spark worthwhile, memorable conversations with your co-hosts and guests, and they'll take your podcasting efforts to new heights. No podcaster should be without Decks, which is why you need to check things out for yourself. As a listener of Pod Theory, you can save 10% off any order of physical Decks products when you shop at poddex.com today. Use the promo code PODTHEORY at checkout and save 10% on your order. So, Deck Pandemonium is me putting myself on the spot by randomly selecting one card from one of my 5 Deck decks and talking about it. Now, I shuffled my interview deck before hitting record on this episode, and I'm going to pull my card right now. Here we go. Today's question is, what are you most excited about right now? I already did this one, so we're going to go to the next card on the top of the deck. If you could change... I already did this one too. I swear to God, I shuffled these. Okay, try number 3. Which talent would you most like to have? Okay, that's fresh, that's new. Let's think about this. I would say I'm gonna take this to the golf course. I wish that I had the ability to consistently hit drives a good 350 yards down the fairway. Now, I've never had one officially measured, so I'm gonna say I doubt that I've ever hit one that far unless it hit the cart path and bounced. But I've put some out there. I know I've had some over 300 yards, but that's giving it the old steroid jerk, to pull a quote from Tin Cup. It's something that would be just a nice talent to have, to know that I'm setting myself up for a nice approach shot every time. And when I say 350 yards, I'm talking straight down the fairway. None of this slicing bullshit that I run into sometimes. As I record this episode, it's March. I haven't played golf since, I think, October, and I've got the itch. So that's probably why hitting long, consistent drives is a talent that I wish I have. That's probably why that's on the front of my mind. But yes, Poddex asks, what talent do I wish that I had? And that talent would be hitting long, consistent drives off the tee every time I play a round of golf. That does it for this installment of Deck Pandemonium. Again, check out poddex.com. That's PODDECKS.com. Check out all the great decks they have available for sparking conversation on your podcast, and use promo code PodTheory at checkout to save 10% on your order. Good talk. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.